Yes. It has. And I'm just, Leanne, are you still, you could still see okay? Leanne?
She has no audio. Oh, wait.
I'm on now. Just give me a moment.
Well, I thought you'd appreciate this.
Aw, that's so cool.
We've got a minute or so, so we'll... Hey, Sandy. Hey, Linda.
This is cool. Our whole coaching practicum is on the call. Hi, Nancy. Hi, Tom. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Tammy.
Leanne Hoagland-Smith, how the heck are you?
I am well, thank you for asking. And yourself?
In lovely New Mexico, Arizona, which one?
Northwest Arizona.
Okay, good to see you.
Well, thank you. It's good seeing everyone as well.
So I have 3 o'clock on the nose. The subject matter today is focusing on strategic planning, helping your customers deal and create the new normal. And Doug is our facilitator today. Hey Grant. Hey Amy.
Hi. How are you?
Hey Andrew and Vicky. So instead of necessarily being a learning lab today, what we're going to be doing is Doug is going to be facilitating a workshop. So we're all very cognizant of the fact that we're in the midst of some pretty interesting things. At some point in the next month or so, things are going to allow to be able to go back to somewhat a level of normalcy. But I think that word has changed that definition has changed, as everybody would concur. So Doug has agreed to facilitate a workshop today. What are some of the questions, discussions, action steps that you can be talking with your potential clients about in your buying, selling process? In some of the added value you're giving, or with existing clients that would help them address, what are you going to do in the next 7 days? What are you going to do in the next 14 days? What are you going to do in the next 30 days to create something that looks like a strategic direction that's successful for your particular organization? So instead of, again, the traditional learning lab, Doug has agreed to facilitate a conversation, a workshop, to really pick everybody's brain that's on the call, because there's some pretty bright people on this call. And, we've got almost 30 participants. So that's the intent. We've got 27 folks. That's the intent. That's the goal, is for everybody to walk away, to contribute to the conversation, but also take away some nuggets that you can weave into your potential client and client conversations that will help you facilitate them to what is next, and maybe that's the right word instead of normal. What does next look like for them as an organization? So with that, Doug, I have effectively hit record, and it's all you.
All righty. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to share my screen with you here, and we'll go. I'm going to do a little bit of an overview, and then as Tammy said, I'm really interested in kind of hearing from you. I hope everybody can see that. So I was talking with people earlier today, and one of the things we've started to comment on was the amount of drug advertising and so on that's on. And so the first thing I wanted to do was offer a disclaimer. I'll do it, try to do it in the right speed. Trusted Advisors practicing this Zoom session as a service is neither legal interpretation nor a statement of Trusted Advisor policy referring to any specific product or entity. Does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Trusted Advisors. The views expressed by the presenter and the guests are their own, and appearance on this Zoom call does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by Trusted Advisors employees are their own. Employees do not necessarily reflect the views of Trusted Advisors. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact the Trusted Advisors Office of the General Counsel. Just kidding.
That was good.
So where am I going? After Tammy and I talked last night or yesterday, I burned a little bit of midnight oil, and I said, how do I want to set this up? And so I even changed it even in the time that Tammy Tammy and I talked about it, but I do want to get you guys involved. So years ago, as somebody once said, if you're old enough to remember the commercials from TV, this is your brain. And as somebody said once at the end of Fast Start, this is your brain on Doug. So that's where I'm going to kind of talk to you today in terms of helping you kind of think through some things that maybe you've thought about in the way that I'm thinking about it. Maybe you haven't. But let's just kind of go and see where this all goes. Mental machinations. What are the assumptions? What are my assumptions and my predictions that I think are going to come up a lot in conversations, particularly based on what I've been experiencing these last 2 or 3 weeks since everything really started to change in a big time way. Talking to a lot of different people, it's how are they really describing the current struggle? And it has been everything from they feel more connected to their people on the line than they do executives that are working remotely, to my self-worth is starting to be, I'm starting to question elements of my self-worth. We were talking to somebody yesterday who talked about there's almost a resentment building up between people who are having to put themselves in harm's way versus the folks in the same company that have been given the option of working at home. So these are some of the just couple of quick examples of kind of how different organizations are struggling. On the other hand, we've got some clients that are busier than they have ever been. The phone is ringing off the hook. They can't even keep the stuff that they're shipping. They can't keep it going out the door. So part of this is a recognition that everybody's in a different place. I was working with a husband and wife team today, and they said, you know, what's really interesting is normally I do not have a problem concentrating, but I have found it so challenging to work from home. I don't know what it is, but I can't seem to get down to the level of concentration that I routinely get to without even thinking about it when I'm sitting in my office. And he said, and yet I've worked from home before. He said, I can't really put my finger on what's different. So these are all kinds of things that are kind of, if you will, background, just in terms of the work environment. You know, who's trying to homeschool their kids at the same time their spouse is trying to use something, versus even what kind of furniture are they sitting on, you know, kind of during this period, is all having an impact, not only in terms of their productivity, but their outlook as well. That kind of took me into, let's talk a little bit about the fears and the unknowns. Right now I'm hearing a wide variety of fears, not only from the obvious that you would expect, health-related fears, but I'm also talking with people in terms of how is the economy going to come back? Is it going to come back? Is it going to be long-term? But I've also talked with clients that their biggest fear right now is that if they've got a lot of accounts receivable out there, are they going to get paid? And how long is it going to take them to be made whole? So even if they've got a good book of business, that the day they go, yep, let's go back, having jobs in the queue is not an issue. Are they going to have the cash flow? Or are they going to be able to manage the cash flow to get and keep their people paid during this time period is something that they're worried about. We certainly have the unknowns about how long is this going to take? What should we expect? Is there going to be a second wave that we're going to have to worry about? And if so, is it just going to be a minor wave? Is it going to be a major wave? Is it going to be totally disruptive in terms of what it is that they're doing? Or is it going to be okay? Yeah, it's kind of like the equivalent of a winter flu. And now that we've managed, now that we understand sanitation and not shaking hands, and we're in those kind of time periods and so on. All right, yeah, that's just going to be to Tammy's point, kind of the new way we're going to have to operate. What I'm also expecting is when things first open up, I'm expecting that there is going to be some early adopters, that they're going to go, you know what, I can't stand it. I can't stand being in the house anymore. I can't stand not doing this, that, not doing this. And to me, I got to get back to some semblance of normal. And they're going to be the ones that are going to kind of push the rock a little bit in terms of seeing how are they going to do things. They're probably going to be the businesses that are going to try to open up the quickest, because they're dying to get back to what used to be, so to speak. Then I expect to see some acceptance of progress. That as people get comfortable that okay, we're starting to see some people interact and we're not hearing the same amount of war stories. I'm going to even be paying attention to what percentage of the news on TV, not unlike the book Megatrends that used to measure newspaper column inches to indicate what stories were in the headlines and what stories were no longer relevant just by the amount of newsprint they had. I'm going to be paying attention to broadcast news in terms of how much is this corona related and so on versus other things. When other things start to take the place of nonstop corona, then I know we're starting to make some significant headway. I'm kind of viewing that as the tipping point. And it's similar to an eccentric wheel. It's going to take a while to get up there, but I do expect that once that tipping point starts to take place, more and more things are going to go back closer to the way they used to be. But that said, and I'll talk about this in a couple of minutes, do I see some fundamental changes that I'm expecting? Yeah, I do. And then it's going to be, because of the resilience of people overall, people are going to figure it out. Even in clients that I've been talking to in the last couple of days, they've been talking to me about, man, the first week and a half was really tough. I was trying to manage my kids' schoolwork and I was trying to manage this and manage that. But quote unquote, we're starting to get into a routine. And so even if we have a new normal coming out of this, I do expect that people are, to the degree that people always wanted a routine. If they never wanted a routine, they're not going to want a routine now either. But to the degree that routine was really important to people, I would expect that groove to start setting in, and that may not be for a while. Meaning, it may not be until late 2021. But I do expect that to happen. What are my expectations toward what used to be phrased as normal buyer behavior? And here I'm looking at it from a marketing side, not necessarily from a trusted advisor's lens on this particular one. But historically, when it came to a new product or new service adoption, you'd have people that would be kind of considered the innovators, and they'd always be trying something new. You have the adopters or the early adopters that were kind of the next wave of that. It would start to swing up in terms of the early majority that typically, believe it or not, based on some numbers I've seen, seem like it's about 39% of the population. The late majority is another 39% of the population. And then finally, what's known as excessive traditionalists, that basically the last 5% that don't want to change. What are my expectations? I'm expecting that even if we had these same 5 elements, I'm expecting to see a pause button between innovators and the time that adopters take on. I expect to see another pause button hit between the adopters and the early majority. I don't expect to be much of a, bless you, I don't expect to see any kind of a pause button between the early majority and the late majority. I think by the time we get there, momentum is going to be kind of in place, and I don't expect to see a lot of change in the behavior of typical excessive traditionalists. One of the questions that I've been kind of thinking about over the last day or so is, when businesses go to open up, what if their employees act like normal people? And by that, I mean, wonder if their staff has the same characteristics as innovators, adopters, early majority, late majority, and traditionalists, in terms of how willing are they going to be to go back to work just because the workplace is now open. And if you think about the amount of complexity that we have here in terms of who may have a child who has some kind of an autoimmune deficiency that under normal circumstances wouldn't be that big of a deal as it relates to people going back to work. But if you have people that are living, in shared family situations with in-laws or kids or uncles or aunts or anybody who has people, across multiple generations. How much of a concern is that going to be in terms of going back to work in the traditional workspace? How is the traditional workspace designed? Were people relatively close together, or were people spread out historically? How do we expect those to play out? Are we going to see a lot of resistance in terms of people not wanting to go back to work and want to continue to telecommute? And yet we may have pockets of people that go, God, I can hardly wait to leave my house in the morning and go back and being able to, share stories around the coffee pot and the break area and so on. But I'm planning on kind of walking my clients through, let's talk about a little about scenarios of how you're going to handle this if these things come up. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to you guys, and I'm going to quit. I'm going to stop my share just so I can see, because I'm assuming that Tammy, are you running the? Are you going to run the participants bar, or did you turn me over as the host?
I can do you as a co-host.
Unless it would be easier for you just to call on people, and I won't have to stop the screen share.
I can do it whichever you prefer.
Why don't you go ahead and use your in the bottom of your, it's either in the top or the bottom of your Zoom bar, you should see something that's participants.
Yep, I got it.
And if you click on that, you should be able to raise your hand. And Tammy, I'll just ask you to acknowledge people in the order that they're raising their hand.
All righty, gotcha.
So my ground rule on this is you can talk about any or all of these from your perspective. What are you thinking about, and what client conversations do you have in and around this? And I'd like this conversation to go until about quarter of the hour, and then I've got a couple other things that I want to talk about.
Bill Kelly is first up.
Hi guys, Doug, I think I've got the answer to your tipping point. We have been so satiated with all this COVID news that the press certainly has ignored the upcoming national election. And yet you still get snippets of how many millions of dollars these folks are raising. They're going to spend the money that they've got. I think it's going to be nonstop political ads. I think it's going to be nonstop commentary. So I believe, short of thousands of people continuing to die every day, which appears to be waning, that we're going to be very soon back into the nonstop political agenda. And that's going to be, you talk about column inches shrinking. I think you're going to have a complete flip over how much time has been spent COVID versus what's going to be politics. And I think we're blessed for a while. We've been blessed not to get the stuff already, but it's going to kick in, I think, sooner than later.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Tom Lemansky is on deck.
So with any strategic plan, there are key assumptions. And I think it's a fair question to ask our clients. If you look at your pre-pandemic assumptions, how many will be true on the other side?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tom.
With that, Charles Reese is on deck.
Yeah, I guess in my experience, I haven't found the early adopters yet. But I guess in talking to people, I sort of try to think, like, in my mind, there's 4 issues that almost every business, at least here, is going to have to address. Is one, the whole issue of being able to get credit is going to be very important. And so business planning, being credible, to me, is very important. Here prior to this, there was a real shortage of skilled labor, and that's not going to go away. That's not going to change. And the whole issue of people falling in love with working at home, I think these people are going to have more leverage than you might think. I think the issue of safety is something that everyone's got to address. I was sort of musing about this, but like I think last night was the first time I heard a TV ad, and it was for a national used car chain. And they were actually claiming that they can deliver automobiles cleaner and safer than all the competition. And I think for service delivery, that's going to become an issue. And I think lastly, I think everyone's had to think about innovating their offering a little bit. Because I don't think delivery will be quite the same the way it was. So I try to guide the conversation that way towards those 4 points.
Thank you, Charles.
Sandy Mitchell is on deck.
I have a hope and a fear. My hope is that as people have noticed the closure of a lot of the factories and less traffic and all those good things has actually cleaned up the air. Actually, the air we're breathing is a little cleaner now, and some of the environmental unintended consequences have been positive. So my hope is that people will actually recognize that, and as they come back into doing what they're doing, they'll pay more attention to that as a need. My fear is that they're going to ignore it totally. And they're just going to jump into, let me get my cash flowing, let me get as much money as I can, let me find my niche, let me find my opportunity. But it's at least a question to ask some people, how can they take advantage of any unintended good consequences of having, not so much commuting, not so much polluting in the atmosphere of stuff.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you. Platform's open, ladies and gentlemen. Anybody want to follow Sandy?
I have something.
Bob, Fritz, did I see your hand go?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep. You're
Okay.
good.
I think, following up on what Sandy said, I think when people just get back into their work environments, there's going to be some kind of division about the way people saw this. To the comment earlier about the political ads coming back, there's always that type of division. But I think there's going to be a question about who was being careful, who maybe left work earlier than someone else to be home with their family. And people might start to, inappropriately have judgments about that and maybe some bias with their own colleagues. And I think that that is something that management has to address one way or another with an open forum or more free-flowing communication. And I just think that's a point for a coaching moment.
Thank you. Steve Terasaki is on deck.
Doug, I think that in response to some of the statements, I think that the new normal is actually going to be something that will have government regulation attached to it. And so as we think about what this is going to be, particularly around regional economies, there's going to be a lot of new mandates or new regulatory issues around safe distancing, around how many people can actually be in a store. I don't think those are just going to just automatically go away, because as Governor Cuomo was saying this morning, yesterday, he and like the governors here on the West Coast are really looking at ways to adjust the balance when they do lift and start to open economy and test it against the new outbreak of coronavirus. So in many ways, I think those mandates are going to still exist. Whether or not we can actually go to a baseball game in July or August, I seriously doubt that. I think that there will be many of these issues around how we conduct ourselves in group assemblies that will prolong itself into the fall and potentially into 2021. And so as businesses and as people are advising people that are making decisions in businesses, I think one has to be realistic about incorporating that whole view of what is the regulatory mandates that are going to come out, and how are the various industries. Retail is very different than manufacturing, which is very different than restaurants, which is very different than consulting practices, right? So each of those kinds of industry norms have to be looked at in relationship to what we might expect to be these regulatory mandates.
Nancy Taylor is up. You still with us, Nancy?
There, am I back? Am I there?
You're loud and clear.
Okay. As some of you have known me through my journey with the network, and I've adopted a title that's different. I've always called myself, from the days of Fast Start, the architect of possibilities. And I think where we are now in the world lends us to an opportunity to encourage possibility thinking. There's no chance of returning to normal as we knew it. So if we encourage people to think outside the box, it gives them hope. And it actually caused me to do something different. I finally wrote my first draft of a blog this morning. And in terms of the possibilities that I think we can encourage people to focus around are, like Sandy said, sustainability. Sustainability has been a passion of mine. Now people are starting to think more from their hearts than their heads. So that's a great opportunity to open up that dialogue and have them say, this is what we can do to keep our environment safe. Another one is technology. I'm a firm believer in the use of blockchain. Blockchain is a definitive product that can help us create more sustainable supply chains. Supply chains was one of the biggest issues in this crisis. So it gives us an opportunity for dialogue there. And then one that's going to be really unique, that's near and dear to my heart, is globalization. Is it a possibility to expand overseas? So just in those three categories, to me, I think the opportunities for us are endless.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. Leanne, you're up.
Well, as I was listening to everyone, a couple things came to mind. I think you're going to have businesses reassessing themselves. How can they be more essential? So if this does happen again, if there is another reboot of this virus or a new virus, they can have sustainability. There may be some more pressure on state governments to make their businesses essential. I'm blessed being in Arizona. Real estate is considered an essential business. So our sale leads have gone down a little bit, but we're still making offers, showing properties. Another opportunity is for home buyers. The lending institutions are dramatically changing their lending practices because they don't think they're going to have money. And I make that with a question mark. And so that may be some opportunities for some local workshops for first-time home buyers or refinancing. As well as another thing is, how are we going to change our own sales behaviors? And that's really why I joined today, is because as the world's changing, it's always changing, but now because of this COVID situation, how are we going to change our behaviors?
Thank you, Leanne.
I don't have any new participants on deck. Anybody else that had their hand up have a follow-up comment? I lie. Amy White, you just came on?
Tammy, this is Arnie. Do you hear me or see me on your screen?
I hear you now, Arnie.
Okay. Whenever you have an opening to call me.
Yep, go for it, Arnie. Arnie?
I was unmuting. Hang on. I was doing it temporarily with the space bar. I didn't want to do that when I was talking for longer. Key thing that I've discovered is every client is different depending on where they are in the business they're in. All the way from people that are crawling under the bed in a fetal position because their businesses involve totally touching people and they almost don't even want to take a call, to those that are seeing great opportunity. And I've got a couple of those that this is great opportunity. And usually it's depending how digital their platform is and their product offering is. The more digital, the better. The other thing is, anybody involved in a long cycle between selling and delivering a product is not feeling a financial pinch because they've got an overhang of business that was done prior to March 1st to March 15th. And that's a different animal. With those clients, I've had to challenge what's the plan B when the revenue stream is yet unchanged. I was with one this morning where actually March was wonderful, but April's coming down a little bit. And then when I asked the question, have any sales processes started since we began this new normal? And the answer was few and none. And so that we better be determining a plan B to keep the business going as to what we're doing, and each one would be different again. And then the key, I think Nancy was saying this, it had to do with possibility. And that because each client is different, the possibility is open and different with each client. And so it's being sure to awaken and the challenge to what's possible. And then that ties into my last point is we will never return to exactly the way things were. We never have after any major calamity, be it world wars or be it financial disruptions or be it 9/11. And this will be no different and probably greater than I think greater than 9/11. So there will be tremendous dislocations that we need to help clients identify and work through. And that was all I had. And Doug's where I'll go back to lurking.
Thank you. Al, Greg?
Hey, thank you. Hey, Doug, a really good presentation there. But one thing you did touch on, and I actually had a conversation with an employee from a brokerage that I trade from, a platform that I trade from. He was with customer service. And I spoke with him on Friday, and he's actually been working from home for the last 30 days. And I asked how he liked it, and he said he didn't like it at all. He just absolutely hated it, gave him no break from the house. And one of the things he shared with me was that while he liked his supervisor, his leader wasn't a very strong leader from the distance. And my wife has worked from home for the last 4 or 5 years. And she's had a couple different leaders, and one has been very, very strong, and one has not been so strong. And although it saves millions of dollars for the different companies out there, I think that's going to be kind of that value or the barrier for a lot of the companies is how good are the leaders that are going to be managed from a distance now, because the metrics are very cold, and the metrics that you're looking at, the call rate, drop rate, or whatever other metrics you're looking at from a customer service standpoint. I get it's a very narrow window that I'm looking at, but just talk to this young man from, I believe he was in Arizona actually. Just speaking with him, he was just miserable. As soon as he hung up, he was on another call. And he just had so many difficulties dealing with that. He didn't know if he's ever going to go back to work at the call center again. And he just absolutely didn't like it. But that was a really good point you made. What if employees act like normal people? And, there is no normal for them anymore. So really good point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy?
So one of the things I'm doing personally is.
Hey, Tracy, I'm having a really hard time hearing you.
Okay. I will try speaking up. Does that help?
Do you have your audio button clicked for letting your machine manage that for you?
It should be.
Okay.
It hasn't been a problem on any. My settings are no different than they were for the last several Zooms.
You're a little better now, but go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, here I'll lean into my computer a little bit.
Better.
So one of the things that I've been kind of keeping tabs on, as I'm sure that I'm not the only one. Every company that you've ever given your email address to has sent you 10,000 emails to tell you how they're responding to this crisis. And one of the things that I've been kind of taking notes on is how different companies are treating their people in this process. So I'm making a note. If a company sends me an email that says, we're furloughing this many people, but we're making sure they still have health insurance, that matters to me. I'm interested in knowing that. And just kind of getting a sense of who's doing what and how they're approaching their leadership of people and taking care of people in this situation. Obviously, right now, the worst thing that can happen to you is to lose your job, because now you've lost both your income and your health insurance in the middle of a pandemic. So, so I guess the point to this group is, I think we're seeing companies kind of show their true colors about what they care about when these kinds of situations come up. Do they recognize that their people are their biggest asset, or do they just see them as a cost center? And that, to me, is a big opportunity for us with our clients to ask them that question. What matters to you? Are your people your priority, or is something else your priority? And if your people aren't your priority, where exactly do you think your money comes from?
If I can hop in just for 1 second, there was a group of us that were on a call with some CEOs around the world. And I was particularly struck by the comment that this one CEO had. He has about 90 employees in his company. And he said he makes it a point to call each one of them personally every week. Not necessarily from a business conversation perspective, but to ask the question, how are you doing? You know, and kind of what's cooking with your family and what's cooking with your relatives and those kinds of things. And I was really struck, you know, by that thought of, long after people forget what you said, they'll remember how you made them feel. And I got a feeling his employee loyalty coming out of this is going to be off the chart. I got to believe that you couldn't pry somebody away from his organization for, it would take a heck of a lot of bucks to be able to get somebody to give that up after that level of care, as opposed to, hey, you know, we're going through some tough times, so, you know, enjoy your furlough and we'll bring you back whenever we think we can. What a different message than that. Tammy, I turn it back to you. Who's next?
Doug, you didn't raise your hand, by the way.
I know. I'm exerting co-host rights.
Well, Mr. Tate is on deck.
Yeah, I was on a seminar earlier today, sponsored by the Atlantic magazine. They had the head of the AMA, American Medical Association, and the president of Mount Sinai in New York. And of course, they discussed the current situation a lot, but then they said they're really expecting a lot of waves after this. And these are the waves of the postponed medical conditions, not just COVID-19 results. Operations, surgeries that have been put off, chronic conditions that haven't been treated, and those sort of things. And as a consequence, a huge wave of mental health issues. And so from the standpoint of our own business, those people who are involved in individual coaching, we're not psychiatrists and we're not into psychological counseling per se, but from the standpoint of helping people take a look at their situation and finding direction, it strikes me that a lot of opportunities there.
Thank you, Grant. Do we have anybody else?
I don't have anybody new on deck, Doug.
Going once?
Hi, Lauren.
Okay, Lauren.
Andy's waving.
A couple of you have touched on this, but the people I've spoken with in the last couple weeks, I would say each one of them is of the mind that something huge changed, and I'm not going back to wherever it was. And a couple of you have talked about the mental health implications. and also the idea that how each one of our clients is so different from the next one. And some of us will be in that fetal position for a while, and others will be scrambling and grappling for the new possibilities. But that occurs to me as we go forward. For us, for what we do, I think it's an incredible opportunity. But my concern would be for the sensitivity. Even one of you mentioned the potential for bias in the workplace amongst colleagues. I'm already hearing, the blame game, who knew what when, and I think that can seep into the workplace. So double sensitivity on our end for that.
Thank you. And Andrew has his hand up as well.
Just a quick comment. I've been working with the Chamber of Commerce, and their activity was almost totally revolved around physical meetings. So they've obviously really got to have a diametrically different approach now. And so I'm working with them to see what we can do, and obviously have some digital presence, which was lacking to a certain extent. And one of the things we've come up with that I've suggested, and we've already sent out a questionnaire, is to have weekly infomercials, if you like, from members talking about their business, how it's impacted them, without directly selling, but at least talking about the state of their business and what's going on, in the hope that we can keep sort of membership, so interest going. So I think organizations like that are obviously different to others, but really their mode of doing business has changed 100%.
Thank you.
Got it.
Anybody have any additional comments before we turn it back to Doug?
Sandy's been raising her hand, waving.
Sandy?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make a comment. Doug, I really liked your breakdown on, the normal buyer behavior and the categories. And I think that also tells us something, at least in terms of current clients, to look back and say, well, where do they fall? Where did they fall in that spectrum already? Because it'll give you a clue, at least, as to where their propensity will be for what they're going to do next. And it gives you a sense of what questions to ask. And I mean, I think you can almost come up with, 5, 6 scripts. For the people that were the innovators, they probably have already started doing something, but it's like, okay, how are you taking advantage of this? What are you going to do? How's that going? Blah, 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 blah. The adapters, what have you done so far? How do you see yourself picking up on all this stuff? You don't really have to convince them because they're adapters already.
Yep.
So what are they all about? The early majority, look, stuff's going on. You're going to get a little bit behind the curve here. So, what are you thinking of that's going to get you back out there to distinguish yourself and not get lost in the shuffle, so forth and so on. So I think one can actually parse that. And at least for people that you already know or can easily get a good sense of if it's new clients, there's sort of a certain, because they are all different, but
Yep.
if they fall into these categories broadly, there's sort of a roadmap there for how to initiate and begin working with them in the new reality, whatever that may be, I would think.
Sandy, thank you. You and I were tracking a lot. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Arnie again. I just wanted to add one other thing when we were talking about retaining employees and knowing where somebody's heart is. Came up a couple of times. And it came up twice today, and the first time I'd heard it, where both clients had gotten a significant grant from the SBA. One was over $1 million. A company that employs about 95 people. And these grants are not grants, they're loans, but depending on how many of your staff you retain, they turn into grants. So it means at least for the next 60 to 90 days, many people's jobs are protected. Now, what happens after that, I have no idea. So be aware that your clients are taking advantage of it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This was exactly what I was kind of hoping, that we had such a wide range of responses just based on kind of some shared stimulus. Kind of thinking about this kind of going forward, I was thinking that what you have in front of you there on slide 15 are really conversations that I would not be afraid to have with my clients as part of the strategic planning process. Because I think being able to kind of get this out on the table so that everybody who's sitting around the table kind of understands how their colleagues are looking at this, I think is going to be pretty important to be able to create a lot of shared understanding, or to channel my friend from Arizona, meaning making. So I think these kinds of questions, for as generic as they sound at first blush, I think are going to take people places that they're not used to talking about some of these kinds of things. Some of you started to touch on this as part of the conversation, in terms of, okay, and how will our business model change? I'm asking you to take a look at that one, both as a question that you would be asking anybody that you're working with now, but I think it's just as important for us to talk about in terms of how does it impact us. Coming out of this, you know, I used to do this, should I be doing this, in terms of appropriate business segments that I'm talking with. You know, are there going, I gotta admit, I'm glad I don't specialize in the theater industry in Midtown Manhattan right now, because if that's where I was rolling my dice in terms of my entire income, I don't know when the theater district is going to come back in New York City. I was speculating, you know, if all of us talking about, to pick up on the comment that Steve made in terms of government regulation, are the old historical theaters in New York, in Broadway, are they going to have the same seating? Or is it going to be, if you and another couple buy 4 seats to the theater, does that mean that the row in front of you and the row behind you and 2 seats on either side of the 4 of you all have to be kept empty? And if so, if you have to buy 14 seats in order to put 4 people in the theater, how does that affect the whole pricing model of what it's going to be like to go to a Broadway show? And the kind of the ripples in the pond on that one is when you think about the number of restaurants in Midtown Manhattan that really count on a very, very thriving theater district, which unbeknownst to most people gets managed worldwide by people coming in from all over the world based on what countries are going to be solicited to travel to New York so that they can get special deals on New York theater tickets. That is a whole industry in and of itself, just to get people coming into Midtown Manhattan to be able to fill up hotel rooms and to be able to fill up Broadway shows and attractions and so on. So if that was the business that I was in effective today, my question is there going to be enough business in that segment for me to feed my family in, you know, until something realistically changes, which may not be for a year and a half. So what other segments do I need to parlay my experience on if I was going to move from the Broadway theater district or entertainment related to something else?
Doug, Steve Terasaki had asked that you show slide 15 again.
Steve, is there a comment?
I was just trying to relate the questions that you were posing to the screen, and you just said slide 15, so I didn't know if this was the slide you were referring to.
Oh, I'm sorry. If I did, then maybe I misread it. I meant, this is slide 16, but here in terms of what kind of assumptions are you making and what kind of conversations are you having with other people in the room about all of these kinds of things? and kind of how they're going to play out.
Thanks.
You got it. Are we going to find among us that if we're dealing with firms below a certain size, that their struggle for pure survival, depending on what segment they're in, is going to make it really, really challenging for them to be willing to, to part with any money. Or we may find the other way. We may find that large organizations have had to put out so much money in terms of retrofitting buildings or all those other kinds of things that Steve may have touched on in terms of government regulations, that the cost of staying in business may be so high, they may basically freeze all kinds of other, not only capital expenses, but what would be traditional things that they would invest in just to free up the cash to be able to do the things that are going to be required for them to continue as an ongoing concern. So these are all kinds of things that I'm prepared to put some serious thought to in terms of how it's even going to affect me personally. But I think they're legitimate questions to be able to talk with our clients about as well, or our prospects. What core services are we going to provide coming out of here? And as Nancy talked about, are they going to change? Something like, is sustainability coming out of this thing going to be kind of a buzzword that's everybody talking about, or is it going to be as foreign as speaking in Swahili in the middle of the United States? What for me, and I think for us, the question I wanted to ask is, what areas do we need to hone? Do we need to be better off really understanding somebody's P&L? Do we need to be better off really understanding different levels of team-based behavior versus managing kind of individual contributors? Are we going to need to have a different point of view? I'm thinking that for the next year and a half, as people are trying to get their sea legs underneath them, I'm expecting to have to do a lot more research into the kinds of calls that we're doing right now that says, this is what other people are doing around the country, because I'm kind of expecting, to be blunt, that my facilitation hat may get a little bit, my three-corner hat, my facilitator point, my teacher hat, and my trainer hat. I'm expecting to some degree my facilitation hat might get a little dusty, for the next 6 months or a year, as people are going, Doug, I'm not interested in you asking me 9,000 questions. I'm interested in you giving me insight and answers, because if we knew this stuff, we'd be implementing it already. And I think the underlying panic of, don't just ask me a bunch of questions, help me figure it out, is going to change the nature of what it is that we do. I'm still not going to cross the line in terms of playing armchair psychologist and psychiatrist. That bright line for me, I'm going to keep pretty bright. But I do believe people's expectations of who they're going to invest their hard-earned money in, I do believe that that's going to change. And so I'm prepared to put some more individual time into honing my subject matter expertise, so that when I get into these kinds of questions and people are going, all right, what are you hearing? What is it that you're recommending? What are the 2 or 3 options that you think we ought to strongly consider? Maybe then it becomes the facilitation. But I am not expecting them to just sit back and allow me to ask the same kind of freewheeling questions that most of you know me for. And then depending on your social media presence and so on, how, if at all, do you expect your competitor, assuming you have some in your local area, how, if at all, do you expect them to ramp up what they're doing in terms of any competitive moves that we make? How do we expect any competitive responses to be able to go, I'm going to fight back on that one. I'm just not going to roll over and play dead and let Virginia Timmons take my entire business. I'm going to do something to push back on that one. I'm not going to fold my tent that easily. And of course, on those kinds of things, we have to make sure to use a mic, to channel Mike Sleppen, that it's not a race to the bottom and we're not pricing our services based on the stupidest guy in town. So I think there's going to be all kinds of things that we'd be well served if we think through some of these things in advance. The other thing, I realize that we have about 4 or 5 minutes, and I hadn't decided quite candidly whether I was going to work this slide with you or not. The Greiner model of organizational growth, and just to get everybody on the same spot, as you can see, smaller businesses are over here, and it kind of goes up to large along the y-axis. And startup businesses would be closer to the origin, and mature businesses would typically be farther out the x-axis. Phase 1 is creativity. This is typically entrepreneurship when organizations first get started and so on. And now the organization becomes greater than just the single person in charge. And that's when the business starts to change, and it's either going to go up or it's going to mature and decline. And now it's going up through the phase 2, which is kind of ongoing direction and moving things forward and growing. And now all of a sudden, as it starts to grow, people are starting to go, wait a minute, boss, you're starting to act as almost a potted plant here in terms of holding us back. So people are kind of fighting for autonomy, that they want to be able to do things and not have to check with the boss. So then they go through, okay, I'll start to delegate. And so we're in the phase of delegation. And now we get up here and we have whole organizations that are starting to do their own thing. There's a whole lot of silos that you're starting to see. And now organizations are going through the crisis of control. And now it's like, okay, we can't do it this way. We have to start pretending like we're a real business. And this is when they put all kinds of process and structure in the phase 4 here for coordination. And now all of a sudden the crisis of red tape is, oh my God and Father, why do we have to submit everything, in triplicate and wait a week before we can get a frickin' answer for things? I remember the old days, I would just call Joe and say, Joe, this is okay? Yeah, and everything was all right, and we moved on. Why is everything such a struggle? And so for the organizations that kind of move beyond red tape, now they're into true collaborative operations. And now they're collaborating and so on, and they've started to almost max out, if you will, within how far that they can really grow. And that's when the crisis of growth kind of kicks in. And again, is it going to be one of those things where they're kind of topped off and they start to die, or now they start to engage other folks and they start to build through alliances and mergers and so on. And then after a while, the crisis there is going to be, geez, who are we? We've merged so many times. The basic company that we had all the way back here, it doesn't even feel like the same company. Culture has changed. What happened to the good old days kind of thing? And that's when they go through a crisis of identity. What I would be really curious to see through this is, I'm planning on keeping this one on my desk just as a reference, so that as I'm talking with people, where have they been historically, and how, if at all, is their new normal kind of playing havoc with things that they used to have under control, or what they thought to be under control. And I'm also going to be listening for, are some of these crisis points, are they happening earlier? Are they happening more frequently? So those are some of the I'm sorry? So those are some I'm on some kind of those are some of the kinds of things that I'm going to be personally watching for, because I'm not sure I understand where all of these how all of these different phases are realistically going to play out. I've got 358. Thank you so much for joining me. I've got a whole page full of notes from all the contributions that you've made, so I'd really like to say thank you for that. And Tammy, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Doug. I think it was a very productive hour. Anybody have any closing questions? One of the things that we're going to be doing from a trusted advisor's perspective as we add more learning labs is building on this whole subject matter of the strategic discussion, not necessarily just overarching, but based upon industry. So you're going to see some learning labs come out as it relates to, let's have a specific discussion about what's changing in, I'm making this up, healthcare. What are some of the changes we're going to see specifically in manufacturing? So today was a very 30,000-foot level as it relates to, the business universe as a whole, where you're going to see some learning labs as it relates to very specific industries. So if you have any interest in contributing, or you have an industry you'd like us to hit upon, please send us an email or some kind of a correspondence. But that's going to be coming out in the next 3 weeks. So I've got 4 o'clock on the nose. I really appreciate everybody's participation. It was a very robust discussion, and continue to share your knowledge and expertise in our learning labs. And thanks again, Mr. Brown. Make it a great week, everybody.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Doug.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Doug.
You got it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.